I'd like to introduce my co-author, Ryk Bliszczyk. Ryk is a leadership psychologist. He's also worked in the business area for a long time as a management consultant, and Ryk has had that experience of working with senior executives, which is great. But he's also worked a lot in sport as well, which comes with the way we've written our book. And he certainly worked as a leadership advisor to Melbourne City Soccer Club, amongst others. So it's really great to have Ryk on board. He's also doing his PhD in behavioural economics at Griffiths, which is great. So I'm very pleased to have a good co-author in Ryk.
Thanks, Ern. This is Ern Prentice, a man who has decades of experience in HR, having worked for over 30 years with General Motors Holden, and then many years after that with BHP. Since leaving the corporate world, Ern has used his depth of experience to educate people about leadership. He's written at least a couple of books on leadership prior to this one called The Frontline Leader, and the other one, Leaders Hired, Admired and Fired. And so I was really pleased and proud to be able to join Ern as co-author. So before we talk too much about how we got into working together, Ern, perhaps you can tell me, what was the initiative and the impetus for the book? What was the idea that you had when you decided you wanted to write this book?
Right, well, let's go back to 2001. Now I've sort of left BHP, and I wanted to go to an AFL club because I felt their leadership wasn't right.
Okay.
So, drawing on my background in business, I decided to observe the leadership behaviour on the field for the group. Now that meant I had to develop some behavioural items to look at. So when you look at behaviour for every player, a couple of things come to mind. Leading by example was one. The other one was giving direction and also communication. So I developed 5 behavioural items, and I called it the Leadership Affirmation Program.
Right.
And affirmation meant that you pledge your leadership to the whole of the team members. That's what affirmation is about. So having done that, I then decided, well, I must write a book about my experiences, because I did AFL and soccer and netball and hockey. So I had a fair good range of what this behavioural thing was all about. So I was fortunate to have you on board then, and we together started to write this book. And I really wanted to get the detail of how you go about observing leadership behaviour on the field.
Right.
So that's how I started. Yeah.
Terrific. Yeah, and then you approached me, and I must admit I was impressed immediately when you described the Leadership Affirmation Program to me, and then you took me out on a couple of occasions to see how it worked on the field.
Yes.
And it indeed was very, very impressive. So when you invited me to help you with the book, I jumped at the opportunity. I was really pleased that you thought that someone with my sort of extensive background in psychology and in business might actually be able to bring a different perspective on the discussion about leadership. But I think what I also was trying to do was to help you bring some more academic formality to the book. And I think that's what I've certainly tried to do. So that was a great opportunity for me, which I really, really enjoyed. Who do you think is the key audience for this book? Who are the people that the book is most specifically targeted at?
Right. Well, when you go to leadership behaviours, obviously the coach is the key person. So obviously the audience would have to be the coaches, but also the players, because they both have got to understand the concept of what it means to be pledging their leadership on the field. So certainly the audience would be the coaches and also the players.
Right.
But then I found by working with one club on off the field, the issue came up of, well, what sort of support does off the field help in terms of the performance on the field?
So the courses will be targeted at mainly coaches, do you think?
I think mainly coaches, although if you had a cohesive group of players, we could still probably get them to have a look at that as well. But I think the coach is probably a key person there.
Okay.
Yes, but for on the field.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So this will be some hands-on training for how to use the Leadership Affirmation Program.
Correct.
Is that right?
That's correct. That's right.
And there'll be some additional support through other elements of the program, other courses that will pick up other elements such as.
I think the key thing about the coaches is the fact that they've got to understand how they're going to get the players on board. It's the peer leadership stuff again, as to try and work that out, because the managers and the administrators are the people who are going to support the club.
Right.
And you've got to have that strong background in that side of it.
Right.
And then, of course, the players are the other side of it too.
Right.
But I'd say those two courses will be very valuable.
Okay.
And we look forward to developing them and getting them out into the sporting arena.
Okay. So, with these courses, Ern, how are they different to what's already available out there in the marketplace?
Right. Well, first of all, because the course will be run not only online but with a hybrid course participants, we've got more how in this than you would normally find to do an academic type of course.
Right.
Not that I'm running down academic courses so much, but the thing is we are more specific in saying this is how you go about it. And that's both for the coaches and the players as it is for the managers and administrators. And we're showing the skills in the book as well, which is excellent. So I just think that some of the difference is instead of doing a formal academic course, you're coming away with a lot more of the how,
right,
what it is, and it'll be for both courses,
right,
which I think will be valuable. And then, of course, we'll obviously have a follow-up as well with this. And so I think that's a big thing for the courses.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to point out that you and I will be running
We'll be involved. We'll be involved.
So, absolutely correct.
No,
so this isn't just somebody picking up a curriculum and running it. It'll be you and me.
If the one asks the hard questions, we might answer some of those questions for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll definitely be in the classroom.
So from that point of view, we feel the book should sell to a whole range of sporting people, but particularly saying this is how you're going to do it. And I think that's a key thing for us in our book.
What I was trying to ensure was that we explored the key issues of leadership across the club.
Yes.
And that we brought up the issues and we provided some guidance on how you might answer the questions that a coach or an administrator or a captain or a player might be asking themselves about leadership on the club. So the mental health chapter, for example, which is obviously my area of expertise, isn't a here's what you need to do. It's a if you've got these questions, here are the things. Here are the people you might ask.
Yes.
Here are the people you might draw on for support, as well as providing with you some basic information about what does mental health for an athlete mean.
Yes.
What are the things they're most likely to be confronted with, and then if you have that in your club, what do you do about it in order to prevent even? What are the sorts of things that you might want to ask yourself and what you might want to ask the club about the sort of support that you need?
Yes, and I think there's a lot of questions there. So when you talk about the standards there, we've set up the cultural side, but we set up the question of saying, well, do we have some answers to you? That's huge, and which we do have it in the book.
Yep.
So, but when you look at sports leadership, I mean, let's think about the fact that we're not on the technical side of the sport. We're on the leadership behavioural side of sport, and that's quite different. And if you go and look at any books in Australia or even overseas, there's not a lot. So we just think that we've got a good book going, or we think we have a good book going, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yes.
There are certain requirements in an academic course that says you've got to cover the management field.
Yeah.
When you go into leadership and behavioural side, which Rick and I have gone into, that's a sort of a different area. And that's why I think the course we develop will accept more of the behavioural side as to what you have to do to be performance.
But that's a good point. The fact that most of the courses available today, particularly those in the formal sports management area, are about management. How do you manage a club? How do you administer a club?
Correct.
They're not about leadership of the club. They're not about leadership within the club.
Correct.
And they're not about leadership within the team that is, as we all know, critical for success.
Very much so. And let's look at capability. I mean, if you look at the range of items we cover, there's no doubt you'll get a better idea what capability is all about from a behavioural perspective. And I think we're very happy with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point.
Yeah. And what I really like about the book is that in many ways, particularly the way in which you describe the leadership affirmation program, it is a primer. It is a how-to. You'll get a very good appreciation for what needs to be done to improve leadership within your club from all of the material that's in the book. If you then want help and assistance in how to actually apply it on the ground, then you can come and do the courses with us, and we'll take you through it.
The other one is relationships. Now we're getting into your area of the psychological side. That relationships is the emotional intelligence. We've got to get them to understand that relationship building, particularly in a sporting club, is absolutely critical. Now, fortunately, unfortunately, a lot of sporting clubs get very political.
Right.
And that makes a big issue in terms of how people are going to all go through the same stream of leadership. And that's an issue which has got to be looked at the top level. The CEO, for example, has got to see that. So from that point of view, I still think that we cover a lot in the book about that, which is the question of saying, what does leadership mean?
Right.
And that's the two things.
Right.
That's the two.
Yep. And on that leadership point, one of the things that we do explore briefly, but is the difference between sports leadership,
yes,
and leadership in the corporate world.
That's exactly right.
Those two things are often linked together.
Yes, and we do that.
The corporate world is often looking to sports teams to find out how to do better leadership.
Correct.
But the point that is worth making, and we make it in the book, is that the two types of leadership are actually quite different.
Yeah, they are.
And yes, there are similarities and there are learnings and cross-fertilisation that can occur, but sports leadership is very different to corporate leadership.
Well, it certainly is, because if you look at the question of a business organisation and the way in which they look at their performance, this could be over a year, many years. In sport, it's within 1 or 2 days or 3 days. So now all of a sudden you're saying performance is critical, therefore you've got to have it right.
Yeah.
And that's a big issue for leadership. You've got to have it right.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference between the corporate world, business world, and sport.
And the other critical difference, which the Leadership Affirmation Program addresses very nicely, is that sport is one of those endeavours where there's constant feedback, right? Constant feedback.
Absolutely.
You're getting feedback every week on whether you win or lose.
Correct.
You're getting feedback during the week on how the players are performing, whether they're up to scratch physically and in lots of other different ways. So feedback is critical.
It is.
And that's what the Leadership Affirmation Program does. It adds another element of feedback for the players.
Correct.
To help them shape their behaviour in a way that's going to be more positive and more performance enhancing.
And it's instant.
Yeah, exactly right.
Immediately the game's over, the coach knows, the players will know, how did I behave on the field? Was I pledging my leadership for the whole group? And that brings in the question of saying, well, if you get it right, then performance will come.
That's the important point about the program. It's about adding important information into the feedback that the players and the coaches get every week from what's happening on the field.
When you're observing behaviour on the field, normally it would take 3 people to observe behaviour. If you've got, say, 22 players and you've got to watch the whole field, for example, then you really need the question of saying you're going to need 3 leadership observers to observe it and to record it. And that means that I would think you would pick up at least 80% all the behaviours on the field for 3 people, which is very good.
Okay. Generally, my work as an executive coach and as a corporate advisor, because I have a background in psychology, I take a holistic approach. So I try and understand the person or the people that I'm working with from a holistic point of view. Who are they? And most importantly, what motivates their behaviour? And this is where it crosses over nicely with the Leadership Affirmation Program, because it's about feedback. It's about understanding what it is that you do and how that affects other people. Without that feedback, without that sense of self-awareness about who you are, and what you do and how that affects others, it's impossible to be a good leader. It's impossible to be able to know what actions you need to engage in order to get the results that you're looking for as a leader. And so I spend an enormous amount of time with my clients, both in groups and as individuals, helping them understand who they are, what motivates their behaviour, what their behavioural preferences and tendencies are, and how others are likely to perceive and understand what they're doing, and how they're likely to interpret it, which is then gives them the power to understand how they can shape their own behaviour to influence others more effectively and more directly.
So when I go in to see a client, my key question is, what outcomes do you want from the program we could be running? Now that can be a difficult question, as Rick would have found out already, how to answer the thing, because they say, we're not quite sure, but we have a problem, or there's an issue. And I'm saying, all right, well, we'll discuss that, but what would you like to see at the end of this whole leadership program? And that adds a huge amount of discussion, until I'm saying, okay, I think we might have it right, but then let's put down the outcomes and then we'll work back to what we want to do. And I find from a business perspective, that does help a lot. But in between that, guess what? We find the personalities come out. The personalities of the people saying, well, this is what I want, this is what I want. So we have a great discussion. And I'm sure Rick's had a lot of that experience of saying, well, really, what do we want to do? And that's an interesting one. That's for the clients, yes. We tell them what are the 5 positive behavioural items they want to display on the field. Now, if I went through leading by example, directing, obviously, conferring communication is also very much so. Another big one is encouragement. So we explain those 4 or 5 to them, saying, this is what we want you to do, and then we ask each of the players to give an example of what they would do on the field to match that behaviour. So they are told beforehand exactly what's expected of them. Because when we feed the thing back, the report back to the coach and the players, they already know that we'll be telling them how many times they did direction on the field. It's not a question of saying, well, I'll leave it to the captain or vice captain. No, everybody has got to contribute. And it's a big difference in this affirmation program. Every player has to display leadership. And I think that's important. But those 5 are very critical. Now, there are some negatives, by the way. Poor body language, as Rick would know, can actually about half kill a side. You have poor body language, and you can see it on the field for most clubs. That's something you've really got to address. So we do show some negative behaviours, but we call it developmental, because when you talk about negative, some of the players don't like that thing at all. They hate saying negative behaviour. What's all that mean? So that's what we do. We have 5 positives and 5 negatives, and the poor body language is always a big issue. And when it comes up, it always opens debate.
Yes. And this is, my experience in the corporate world is exactly the same. The more we encourage people throughout an organisation, and in this case throughout the team, to take the initiative to display leadership behaviour, the more successful the organisation is going to be.
And performance.
And in the sports context, that means much, much better performance.
Absolutely.
Because everyone then is taking responsibility for the performance of the club. They're not all sitting back waiting for somebody else to take that initiative.
Particularly the captain, the vice captain, that's saying,
exactly.
Well, we'll leave it to them. We can't do that.
No.
So you're spot on. Every player contributes.
That's exactly
and
right.
that's a big difference with the other type of program.
Yeah, and that's really what the concept of peer leadership is all about.
Correct.